Hello there. What is going on, everybody? Big news coming soon from Fantasy Flight Games. Could it mean something absolutely incredible? We have no idea, but let's talk about what we do know. We're going to talk about the In-Flight Report returning. A big announcement a couple of days ago from Fantasy Flight Games at Gen Con this year. They're going to have the return of the In-Flight Report. And I want to talk a little bit about what it could mean and why I have some of this speculation. So there's going to be a lot of speculation in today's video, but I'll start off with some of the facts, and of course we'll eventually move on to the speculative portion of the video. If you guys are new here to the channel, there's still time left to enter to win that latest $25 Amazon gift card giveaway. You just have to be a subscriber and leave a comment on this or one of my videos. It's as simple as that. I want to hear from you guys. What do you think this might mean? What are your hopes? And maybe what are your realistic guesses? There's sometimes a difference between like, well, I would love it to be this, but realistically it's probably only this. Something like that. I think that's usually where things go. That's certainly one of the things that I'm going to talk about, but I think the conversation doesn't stop here. We keep it going down in the comments section and also on Discord and on Patreon and all the other things that are going to be linked down in the video description below. So let's talk about it. So I'll read the announcement for you guys here. It says, the In-Flight Report is back in a big way. We are thrilled to announce that because of community support, we were able to move the In-Flight Report at Gen Con to a larger room to accommodate more in-person attendees. Tune into the stream Thursday, August 1st at 11 a.m. Eastern Time to hear about your favorite titles, meet the Fantasy Flight Games team, and of course learn about new releases we have planned. Attending Gen Con, get your in-person tickets now before they sell out. This is a big deal. And by all means, if you are going to be at Gen Con and you're a fan of Fantasy Flight Games, you definitely want to check this out in person. There are a lot of reasons to check it out in person. One thing is they sometimes take Q&A, and so if they have an announcement that you're going to want questions for, sometimes they'll have a microphone and you can get up and ask a question. You might have some. There's another big reason is sometimes they have surprises planned. Not always, but when they announced Keyforge, which was a very big deal, they surprised everybody that was in the room with a Keyforge deck. So you got a deck right away. And so that was also really cool. And so, you know, granted, I've been to several of these in-person in-flight reports at Gen Con, and these have always been a very, very big deal. We saw things like the announcement of Keyforge, which was a huge deal. The announcement of the Super Star Destroyer for Star Wars Armada, which was a really big deal. We saw the announcement of Atomic Mass Games as both a studio and also the announcement of Marvel Crisis Protocol. You know, lots of new games. The Clone Wars for Legion were first announced at an in-flight report. The Clone Wars for X-Wing were first announced at an in-flight report. Armada's Clone Wars were announced at a different event at a Star Wars Celebration Chicago 2019. But the in-flight report has always been the place where Fantasy Flight would announce the big new things that are coming. Ever since I think the last one they had in person at Gen Con was with Andrew Navarro, still as head of studio, kind of announcing Atomic Mass Games, and Will Schick came out and talked about Marvel Crisis Protocol. Again, a really big in-flight report where they kind of shared the stage with a whole different studio. And I believe that was the last in-person one. You know, COVID happened not long after the merger and all of the Star Wars games leaving Fantasy Flight. Well, at least all of them Star Wars miniatures games leaving Fantasy Flight. And since then, the closest things we've had to in-flight reports have been the virtual ones that have been on their streaming. I think on their Fantasy Flight, I think still streams on YouTube. I don't think they do direct to Twitch as much anymore. But this is a big deal. The return of the in-person in-flight reports are a very big deal. One of the big reasons that this is important, before we go on to speculation, is that in-person at Gen Con is... Gen Con's kind of like one of the biggest conventions of the year, especially for board games. Globally, it's one of the top board game conventions on the planet. It's also a very big convention for press. And I mean, and it's big for miniatures games too. Many of FFG's historic, best games ever have launched and debuted at Gen Con. X-Wing, I think. Well, I don't know if X-Wing First Edition but X-Wing Second Edition debuted at Gen Con. Armada had its debut at, I believe, at Gen Con. Lot of Marvel Crisis Protocol had its debut at Gen Con. A lot of these games were first available at Gen Con. A lot of big releases debut at Gen Con. It's kind of a toss-up between Gen Con and Adepticon for miniatures games, but Gen Con gets a lot of them. Also, a lot of board games. Twilight Imperium debuted at Gen Con. So, very big deal. A lot of really cool stuff that happens here. Another reason that this is very good is because if there is a new product, something that the press would want to do follow-up interviews, this is a great opportunity. They usually have a press room. So, hey, here's all the things, and then people have questions. When I was there, I was, able to be given a press badge, and then I could go in the back and talk with them, get more private demos of this new product. The Marvel Champions card game, when that was announced, I was able to go in the back and get, like a little tutorial how to play with the designers and all of that stuff. So it's a way to not only announce something, but have a little bit more in-depth press interaction immediately. Now, let's talk about what we know. They did say new releases. They have new releases planned. This could be as simple as talking about, because again, talking about new releases, new expansions for existing product. They've almost always announced something new for the Arkham games. I wouldn't be surprised if there's something new for that. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some new book for Twilight Imperium that's more like a fiction and stuff like that. They've had some branching off things like that, things that maybe don't interest me as much. There's probably going to be a new deck for Marvel Champions or something like that. Things that I'm not as interested in, but there could be some really interesting stuff that is more Star Wars related. Star Wars Unlimited has had a lot of success. I would not be surprised if we see a preview of Set 3 for Star Wars Unlimited. It might be a little early to do that, but Set 2 is having pre-release. That happened this past weekend. I didn't get to go. They were all full, the ones I was trying to go to. So that was a bummer. But Star Wars Unlimited will probably be about time to begin to tease Set 3. So I'm almost certain we'll see a Star Wars Unlimited Set 3 preview, an early first look, maybe, or even at least some like Game Genic like play mats with like, it'll be based on Gungans and it'll have Jar Jar Binks or something like that. I don't know, probably not, but maybe Set 3 will take us in a different direction and it'll do some High Republic stuff or some something a little different, or Old Republic or something like that. But that would be kind of a big deal. But the cool thing is, whatever it is they announce, I imagine there will be some new stuff, like some all-new titles. At least one, I would predict at least one all-new title. And I think why that's significant is because they are going to be at Gen Con in person. They'll be able to answer questions. If there is a new title, then can people say, then the press can go back and like, hey, is this a board game or is this a miniatures game? Is this going to be expandable? How many players does it support? Do you have a preview that you can show us? How does it play? And so on and so forth. So you can get more information based on just what teasers they give you. If they get a new license or a new IP, hey, we're going to be able to make Star Trek stuff too, or something like that, that will also, if it's be able to be asked about and talked about. If they're bringing back an old IP, for example, like the Terranoth for Rune Wars miniatures game or something like that, if they're bringing back something else in the Terranoth world, then of course that would then be able to be talked about and asked about in a little bit more detail. Whatever it is that they end up doing, it's probably going to be something big enough that it's important to have press there. I think that's one of the reasons. Also, I think whatever they're going to announce is going to be a big deal because they have a bigger room than they used to have. Now, having been in multiples of these, usually the room that they have the in-flight report is a pretty big room. If you've been to like Star Wars Celebration style events where they have their kind of press announcement thing. Those are in a small room. The room that Gen Con usually gives FFG is a much larger room than that. And so the fact that they're getting an even bigger room means that they probably have something very big planned. I wouldn't be surprised if they have major news planned for Gen Con August 1st. Now, I'm going to get into some speculation. What could this be? What do I think this is? I think if you're a subscriber of my channel, if you've been watching me for a while, you know I talk a lot about X-Wing and Star Wars Armada. And since those games were both recently dropped by Atomic Mass Games, the timing would be very interesting to see them reverted. There have been rumors that they were thinking about, that Asmodee was thinking about moving those games to another studio, or possibly moving all of their miniatures games to another studio, but at least possibly those games. Wouldn't it be something if Fantasy Flight took over X-Wing again, and maybe just kind of picked it up right where it left off, or maybe rebooted the whole thing? I don't know. Or Star Wars Armada. Same thing could potentially happen there. That would, of course, be a big shift in sort of the company's paradigm of, well, all miniatures games have to go to AMG. Well, of course, that was a thing a while back, but I don't think that really needs to hold true any longer, since we've already seen other studios can make games with miniatures. Fantasy Flight is still printing games like Star Wars Rebellion and Imperial Assault, so those games still exist. They're still for sale. They're still on the website. So why did X-Wing and Armada specifically get removed from Asmodee's website? Why did they, instead of just getting sort of sunset like every other game happens, why did those games get taken down off the website? This might offer some insight into that, because I think, and again, while this is speculative, and it's a big leap to say that FFG is announcing these games are coming back already, I think there's something more to the whole situation than we see, because of the fact that it's so odd that instead of just sunsetting these games, they were completely removed from the website. All stock was completely removed from the website. And there was initially some speculation that, well, maybe they're going to do some rebranding or what have you. Combine that with the rumors that maybe another company is, going to potentially, pick these games up. And then all of a sudden FFG is like, oh, let's talk about our new releases. Now, granted, they have new releases every year. It could be anything. But wouldn't that be awesome to see these games go back to FFG? Wouldn't that be really cool? I think it would. I think it would be very cool. But maybe they won't exactly go back in the same form. Maybe they'll come back. Maybe they'll be relaunched from the ground up. Maybe it's possible that they may run these as a non-pre-painted miniatures line. Maybe they'll be just in gray plastic, or maybe they'll be cardboard only. X-Wing and Armada could both function as a cardboard only game. You don't necessarily have to have the miniatures. Look at, maybe they're a miniatures optional game. For example, look at Outer Rim. It's a board game that some people will use miniatures for, but you don't have to use any miniatures for. It's got cardboard chits. You have cardboard tokens. Maybe they relaunch these games with just cardboard tokens, and if players want to put a miniature on the base, they can. Wouldn't that be something? Wouldn't that be a very clever way to relaunch these games? And maybe it's just not something that Asmodee thought that Atomic Mass Games could do, because they're a miniature studio and they couldn't necessarily make Atomic Mass Games making, a non-miniatures game. So wouldn't that be a very clever way to kind of return these games to FFG, continue development, and not have to worry so much about the pre-painted plastic aspect of these games? Wouldn't that be cool? I think that would be awesome. I think it'd be a very clever way to keep support for these very popular games going without actually, having to eat the cost of how quote-unquote expensive it is to make, pre-assembled, pre-painted miniatures. Yet toy lines do it like crazy, and they don't cost $100 for a pre-painted, pre-assembled like action figure or collectible miniatures. I don't understand all of that. There's a whole lot to talk about with that, but that's probably better suited for another video. But there's plenty of other things it could be, outside of something like X-Wing and Armada going back to Fantasy Flight. Let's talk about some of those other options. Another option could be that they're just announcing something else, because here's a deal that I think is important with Fantasy Flight games, is that Fantasy Flight games has no flight games. They're just fantasy ground games. I mean, they really don't. I mean, technically, yes, Star Wars Unlimited has a couple of ship cards in there, but it's still primarily, it's more about the ground than the space arena. And while some games have a little bit of a spaceship component to them, they don't have any spaceship games. Even Star Wars Rebellion, yes, it has TIE fighters and Star Destroyers, but it's primarily about the people and the planets, and it's not necessarily about the, it's not a space game. And so I think Fantasy Flight games would do well to announce a game that has flight, that is about flight, because they don't have any flight games. In the same way that Asmodee has the Star Wars license, but have no wars in the stars. All of the Star Wars games that Asmodee is making primarily are concerned with the ground. So there really needs to be a Star War in Star Wars, and there really needs to be a flight game in Fantasy Flight. So what could they also do? Could be a whole new game altogether. Maybe they wanted to take, and here's a thought, what if you were to take the best of Armada and the best of X-Wing and try to combine those into a game that can have both fighters and capital ships, and scale it down a little bit to where you can get a little bit of both. Wouldn't that be cool? Like maybe the X-Wings are a little smaller. Maybe the those Corellian Corvettes are a little bit bigger than the Armada, but definitely smaller than X-Wing's huge scale. And a way for you to get fighters and capital ships in more of these medium engagements. Maybe they want to do something like that, but they don't want it to compete, or they don't want to have X-Wing and Armada competing with it. And maybe that's why those were removed from the store. Maybe they're going for something different altogether. X-Wing was supposed to be having a ground game that was going to work with that, and so maybe they're gonna kick that back off, and they don't want it to compete with, but maybe they're gonna rebrand it totally, something like that. Could be a lot of different stuff. What if they're taking these game engines, because I believe Asmodee still owns the engine, and could be might still actually be Fantasy Flight specifically that owns the engine for Armada and the engine for X-Wing. Like the rules system and all of that stuff. It still lies with Asmodee. What if they want to say, hey, you know what? Instead of making Star Wars Armada, what if we made Twilight Imperium Armada? Wouldn't that be very, very cool? Something like that, using an IP that they already have and a rules system that they already have. All of a sudden you wouldn't have to worry about the licensing because it's your own product. And I think Twilight Imperium would be a great platform to put Armada continued development, or all starting over kind of development under a system like that. You use a rule system that's already established. You'd have a whole fan base already with one eyebrow up, maybe both eyebrows up, and doing something like that would be really cool, because if you look at the miniatures for Twilight Imperium, while they're very cool miniatures, they're not like ultra detailed. They're just they're fine. And so maybe you scale those up a little bit more, but maybe you don't have to pre-paint them. Maybe you just use them in colored plastic, so players will have, I've got a red, this faction is red ship plastic, and this faction, and you've got a lot of different races. So you can have a lot of different factions. Maybe you start off with just 4, or start off with just 2, and eventually add more. You have what, like 20 or 19 different races right now in Twilight Imperium that you can easily do, and you can easily add more if you want. You don't necessarily have to add that many, but you could really do a very cool game that way, and let people paint the ships if they want to, but you don't have to. As long as they're pre-colored plastic, that might be a huge cost saver. Or maybe you don't even do them with plastic. Maybe you have the ship packs as a separate purchase to keep the cost down. Let people who want the ships get the ships, but maybe you just sell the cardboard. Maybe you have it be a game that can be played without miniatures. There's a lot of options there, and I think if you go off, Twilight Imperium is a popular enough game where that could totally be a thing. Might be a whole new game system altogether, but I think they're going to have new games. I think they definitely need something that is a flight game, because the Fantasy Flight games is currently missing the flight games. and Star Wars is currently missing the Wars in the Stars. So I just feel like that's probably something that we're going to see. But again, a lot of speculation in this video. I want to hear from you guys. What do you think? I'll be covering this. I'm not going to be at Gen Con. I'm planning to go to Adepticon next year, so I have to budget for that. I don't have the budget to also go to Gen Con unless somebody's somebody out there is looking for somebody to run a booth and somebody wants to fly me out there to Gen Con. I'm probably not going to be there, although I would love to go. It's just not in the budget right now. So, but yes, that's the deal, and I'd love to cover it. If they're streaming it, I'll be watching it. We'll talk about it. I can't wait. I'll be very eager to see what they have announced. But I'm hoping it's something good. It sounds like it's going to be something good, and it sounds like it's going to be more than just, oh, here's set 3 of Star Wars Unlimited. Although that'll also be interesting too. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you're hoping to see and what you realistically expect. And that's going to do it for today's video. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned. More will be coming soon. Big thanks to my patrons. You guys are out of this world and help make this whole channel possible. I will talk to you later. May the Force be with you. Live long and prosper. Be excellent to each other. And always wash your socks.